Creating an ASP.NET MVC site is a lot of fun, but sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with the idea of security. You can't just let everyone have access to your data. The problem is that setting up an authentication system can be intimidating. Either you make your own homegrown system that probably isn't secure, but you understand it, or you try to implement some crazy complicated system that you don't understand, and then you spend every day after that just hoping it doesn't break. At least that's how I felt. Fortunately, the smart people at Microsoft have done a pretty good job of helping us out. Today, we're going to be taking advantage of those streamlined processes to set up both a local authentication system and also an OAuth authentication system using a person's Twitter account. Before we do, though, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Tim Corey, and my goal is to make learning C# easier. If that sounds like something that interests you, I've got two recommendations for you. First, subscribe to this channel and make sure you hit the bell to get the alerts. I am always working on new content based upon the suggestions of my viewers. Second, join my mailing list. The link is in the description below. I don't send out a lot of email, but you don't want to miss it when I do. You'll get insider access to me and to my courses. Now, whether you're new or have been on this channel since the beginning, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and let me know what you think in the comments below. All right, so that's enough about that. Let's get to some code. Now here I have Visual Studio 2017. And we're going to start a new project. And so we're going to go to New Project right here. We'll go to Web and choose the ASP.NET Web Application. Now, if we can expand this out a little bit, notice I'm doing the .NET Framework. Now, a lot of you are going to ask, what about .NET Core? I want to see .NET Core. We'll get there, but I really want to teach the foundation stuff first before we get to the core stuff. That just adds one extra layer of complexity onto our application. So let's deal with the majority of what you're going to do first, especially in the business world. The business world hasn't yet gone fully core. Most of the stuff that I've seen out there is still the full .NET framework. So again, we'll get there in future videos, but for this video, we're going to do the full .NET framework. All right, so we're going to choose a name for the application and also a solution name. So let's just call this the MVC demo, and we'll call the solution name authentication demo. Just to have a different solution name than the project name. That's always good to separate those two so you don't have confusion as to which one's the project, which one's the solution. Just keep a different name. So authentication demo, this will be our MVC demo as the actual project. So that's step one. We've chosen .NET Framework version of the ASP.NET Web Application. We've given it a name. Let's hit OK. And now we get this second dialog. Now it's a little bit shrunk because of I increased the font size for this video. So by default, since we chose MVC, we have MVC selected. But we could choose Web API or Single Page Application or Azure API or Azure Mobile App or Web Forms or Empty. We're going to choose MVC. We'll not choose Web API for this video. It's not really something we need for this video. But if you wanted to have this application work both against MVC as well as maybe a WPF front end or a machine-to-machine front end kind of thing, then you want to have Web API as well to support it. Because Web API will allow you to make API calls. So that's kind of nice for a lot of web projects. In fact, typically when I go into a business and consult, one of the first things I say is you should probably put your code behind an API. It just makes life a whole lot simpler when it comes to changing out your front end. So when they say, I want a mobile app, no problem. Most of your code is behind the API. You just create a little mobile UI and point it to all of our API endpoints. So that's kind of a side note, but for this video, we just need MVC. We're not going to do Docker. That'll be a future video. And we're not going to add unit tests for this. Let's leave those alone. So it's just MVC. But over here on the right, we have change authentication, because right now it says no authentication. Let's change that. We're going to select individual user account. Now this will store everything in a SQL server, which we'll get to, but we can also register and sign up normally just through SQL. And I say normally, it means just inside MVC itself. But we can also enable logging in using Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, or another provider. Today, we'll enable Twitter, but that's just one of the options we can do. You'll see it's very, very simple to do, and adding Facebook, Google, or Microsoft is pretty much just uncommenting a bit of code that I'll show you. Now, we're not going to touch work or school accounts or Windows authentication, because those two are less common from the standpoint of you have to set up a cloud authentication system through Office 365 or Azure Active Directory or something like that, or have a Windows network that does centralized login system. So those are a little harder to demonstrate, especially, and they're also less likely for you to be able to do at home. So we're going to do the individual user account, which is the most common. So we hit OK. So make sure it says individual user accounts here. So MVC, just MVC checked over here, an individual user account. We hit OK. And what this will do is it will scaffold out our project. If you notice in the lower left-hand corner, we see all these NuGet packages that it's bringing in. Now, we've covered NuGet before, but essentially NuGet just allows us to bring in different bits of code and keep them up to date. And in fact, the first thing I'll do is I'm going to go to my references, right-click, say Manage NuGet Packages, and then go to the updates. Notice it says 27 updates. These are all the NuGet packages that can be updated. For example, Bootstrap, the version installed is version 3, but version 4 of Bootstrap is out. We can update that if we want. So some of these are dramatic and some of these are not. I mean, this is a minor version update, whereas jQuery has 2 major versions updated. So there's quite a few updates here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to say select all the packages and hit update. And this will go through and it will get the latest version of all of these and bring them in, kind of merge them into our project, which I don't recommend you doing this if you're doing this to a existing project. Don't just update everything, because you need to make sure that it's going to work with your application, you've tested it, and that it's not going to break something. All right, let me pause it for a minute. Go ahead and accept the license agreement. So don't just do this on an existing project. Go through one by one and update them. Make sure that you want the update it, and then test it. But when you're starting out fresh like we are, it's a great time to do an update all, because it's not really a big deal. Because if it doesn't work, we just redo the package. So now a couple things. First of all, it says multiple packages failed to uninstall, restart Visual Studio to finish the process. We'll go ahead and do that, and we'll also update this as well. So update that. That's finished. Let's go ahead and restart Visual Studio. Shouldn't be a big deal. All right, we'll just check in and make sure that NuGet is good to go. No packages need to be updated. All right, and all those packages are installed. And you may look at this and panic a little bit and say, oh my goodness, they've got so much stuff installed, I need to remove it all. Don't. There's a reason why a lot of this stuff is in here, and it is supporting your application. Now, if you really know what you're doing and say, you know what, I don't want that, then fine, go ahead and remove it. But don't just say, because there's too many, I'm going to remove some. All right? Know what you're doing and why you're doing it before you do it. Okay, now in here, there's the identity information, identity core, and more. It's scrolling really fast here. But there's the OWIN security for Facebook, Google, Microsoft account. There's the OAuth stuff. there's a whole bunch of stuff that is supporting our authentication. So before we do anything else, what I'm going to do is just run this application. Going to hit run. I'm running it in Google Chrome. That depends on whatever your default browser is. If you have more than one, you can actually start it in more than one browser at the same time. So this is loading up. It's going to compile a project, make sure it works, and then start up. Now it looks a little different than normal just because I have installed the Bootstrap 4. And that's actually something that's caused a little bit of a problem because I normally have a menu up here. And I don't have the menu right now. So what I'm going to do is, and I'll show you how to do this, right click, go to my NuGet packages. Let's go find Bootstrap. Bootstrap's at 4, and I say, you know what? I'm not a big fan. It's causing some problems. So going back to 3.3.7. When it went to 4, they changed a lot of their class names and other stuff, and it made some breaking changes. It's a great system, and I encourage you to learn 4. Don't just stay on 3. But for our purposes, I don't want to have to redo the entire demo, the front end for it. So I'm going to downgrade to version 3.3.7. So we hit update. It's actually going to move us backwards in the chain. And that should, and it says, okay, I can't find a file. Let's see if that's actually a problem or not. So right now it says we're on 3.3.7. And if we run this again, let's see how we do on our user interface. All right, so our user interface looks radically different than it used to. And notice up here we do have our bar that shows our links. We can go to the About page, the Contact page, as well as the Home page. We also have these 2 links over here, which are important for this demo. The first one being Register, and then the second one being Log In. If we click Register, we get this page right here, really simple. Just email address, password, and confirm password. That's all we need to do. So, and we also have this login button. If we click here, it says, okay, here's your email address and password. If you already have one, go ahead and log in. You can also register as a new user, which takes you back to this register page. And over here on the right, it says use another login service. And right now, there are no external authentication services configured. So, oops, I clicked on that article, which is great. They actually have an article right here telling you how to set this up. But I'm going to walk you through it. So ignore that article until later. All right, so the one thing I want to start off discussing is what's the difference between registering and using a different service. Well, when you register, you're going to give them a login name and password, and it's going to create all that locally. But when you use a service like Twitter, what you're going to do is actually it's going to pop a window up and have a Twitter login on the Twitter page. And you're going to put your login and password in, or if you're already logged in and have your authentication system saved or authentication information saved in your browser, then it will just say, do you want to authorize this app, this particular app right here, to view this stuff about you? And we're going to show you how to, I'm going to show you how to kind of trim that down. It's just the basics. We're not going to be able to tweet from a person's account. We're not going to have access to even read their tweets. All we're going to have access to is to know who they are. And what we're doing by that is saying we don't want to control who you are. We want to let somebody else take care of changing your password whenever you need to. And if you've lost your password, all the good stuff gets handled by Twitter, not by us. So that's the difference. With this system right here, it's kind of more homegrown. It's scaffolded out by Microsoft, and there's a lot of stuff here to handle all that stuff, but it really is stuff that we control. If we log in with a different service, they control all the stuff that surrounds that authentication system. So the lost password, the expired password, all that good stuff gets handled by, say, Twitter, and all we do is say, hey, can you log into Twitter and using this special link, then we'll show you how to do that, or I'll show you how to do that. I'm not sure why I'm a we today. But if you use that link, then we go out to Twitter, we ask them to log in. When they do, Twitter sends us back, our application, back a thing that says, yep, they are who they say they are. And so you can go ahead and let them in. So we'll set that up. But for right now, let's go ahead and register as a new user. So I'm going to use my email address, and I will, first I'll show you a bad password. So if I say test, all lowercase, and no confirmed password, I hit register, and it says, nope, couple errors. First of all, the password must be at least 6 characters long. Second of all, the password and confirmation password don't match. So let's do testing, all lowercase, and I hit register. The password must have at least one non-letter or digit character. All right, so now I'm going to do testing with capital T. And it says, oop, one non-letter or digit character. I forgot that. So testing 1. At least one non-letter or digit character. Well, I already had one of those, but testing 1 dot. And there we go. So now I'm logged in, and I had to use testing 1 dot with a capital T. So, and yes, you just have my password there. Don't worry, you can't get to it. But so now it says, hey, hello, me at timothycorey.com. So now I'm actually logged into the system. The register and login buttons are gone, and instead we have a log off button. If I click on the hello, me at timothycorey.com, I can see that I can change my password here. I have 0 external logins associated with this account, and I'm not using two-factor authentication. And again, there's an article for that, which is great. So we found a couple things. First of all, there's a little bit of messaging we needed to modify or tweak, which we could do. But essentially what we need to tell people is you need to have one uppercase, one lowercase, and one number and one special character, versus just saying we need to have one or the other. So we need to have both. But that's not a big deal. So we've now logged into our site, and it knows who we are. We can log off. We can use a login, and we can use my email address and my password, and now I'm logged in. So that's essentially the right out of the box, haven't touched a thing. Notice I said this was supported by SQL, but yet we haven't set up a SQL database. Okay, everything here is just out of the box working. So let's see how this actually works. All right, so if we go into the content folder, the app start folder, there's a couple of config files I want you to look at. First, let's look at startup.auth.cs. In here is where a lot of the configuration for your authentication system is in place. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here, and by and large, you can leave this as it is, and it just works. Like I said, we've got a working system right now without touching anything. The really cool thing is, if you come down here, near the end, you see these sections. Uncomment the following lines to enable logging in with third-party login providers. That's kind of cool. So for example, Twitter, we just uncomment this right here. Now notice consumer key and consumer secret. We don't have those. So we're going to get those and set this up. But if I wanted to use Facebook, well, I'd get a Facebook app ID and app secret, put it there, and then uncomment this section. Pretty simple stuff. And that really is pretty much all it's going to take to do any of these. Now, Twitter is a little bit harder just because there's some quirks to it. And so I'm going to show you how to get around those quirks or fix those quirks. And that's one of the reasons why I use Twitter. Another is it seems like everyone has a Twitter account, in the tech world at least. So that's another pretty safe one. So that's the first place to look for, and just kind of look around and see what there is. For example, the login path is account/login. There you go. And there's some validation information here we can check. But then also there's this identityconfig.cs file over here. So in here, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you see this create method. And inside here, we have validation logic. For usernames, we could say only allow alphanumeric usernames, which is set to false, which is great because my username right now is my email address. We also have this require a unique email address, which is set to true, which means you cannot have two users with the same email address, which is kind of nice because otherwise you might have 4 users that have the same email address and then you don't know who is who. Now, validation logic for passwords. This is where we kind of ran into that wall. Required strength is 6. That's not very secure. Maybe you want to bump that up to 8. Well, just put an 8 there. Require non-letter or digit. Yes. Require a digit. Yes. Require a lowercase. Yes. Require an uppercase. Yes. See the problem we have? We require a digit and we require a non-letter or digit, which I'm pretty sure this one is saying we have to have either a second digit, or we have to have a special character. So there may be some tweaking you can do to turn one of these off and say false. We could also tone this way down, turn everything to false, and set the required length to 2, and then have a really insecure system or unsecure system. But for right now, I'm going to leave it at 8, and I'll set these as they are. Now, this does not affect current passwords. This only affects new passwords, which means if I were to set this to a required length of 20, that'll run just fine. I can still log in with my current testing1 password, even though it's not 20 characters. But when I go to reset it, it's going to say, you can't use testing1 again or testing2 because that's just not long enough. So now it's a little ridiculous to require 20. I think 8's fine. So there's some other stuff you can go in here and you can tweak. There's a whole lot of configuration in here. We're going to go into even more depth. This is a really kind of skim the surface video. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. We'll get into that in future videos. But I want to at least get you going and give you some direction to kind of poke around to find other stuff on your own. So those 2 places to look are the startup.auth.cs and identityconfig.cs. Both of them are in the app_start folder. And they come default out of the box. So that's the C# side of things. But remember I said this is supported by SQL, and we didn't set up a SQL database. So where is this data going? Well, for that we go to web.config. In here we have a connection string. We have one connection string, and this points to our SQL server. In this case, it says the data source is a local DB, and it's in the app directory or data directory, and it's called ASP NET MVC a whole bunch of numbers .mdf. This is the local database in a file that Microsoft creates by default for you when you create this identity template or use this identity template. You could get by with deploying this, but I wouldn't, because it's just not the full power of SQL and it's not as secure as you'd like and all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and not do that for production. but for our testing purposes and for maybe a little application you create for your friends, your family, whatever, no big deal. Go ahead and use this. So let's actually explore the data that's in here. So if you go to the View menu and look for the SQL Server Object Browser, we open that up. We're going to see a couple of SQL servers, but the one you want is the one that matches our connection string. And that connection string, if we scroll over here, it says MS Local DB, which is this one right here. And inside here are a couple of databases. I created a previous demo of MVC. But if we come over here and look at our file, it says that the initial catalog is ASP NET MVC demo and a whole bunch of numbers. This one right here. So in here is a full SQL Server as far as content goes. So we have tables. We don't have store procedures, but I believe you can add them if you wanted to. But for right now, let's look at the ASP NET users table. This is where all of our users live. So you right click on this and say, let's view the data. Now it's going to get a little squirrely with all my different windows open here. So let's kind of shrink things down a little bit. So here we have just one record. Notice the email address. There we go. Email address is my email address. Now check this out. Password. It's actually called a password hash. That's my password hash. This represents testing with a capital T 1 dot. Now notice they're not storing that in the database. This is one of the reasons why this is a large step up from you creating your own login name and password system in some quirky database. You're probably storing the actual password. Microsoft does not do that. Microsoft says that's not a good idea. Instead, we're going to hash that password and store the hash. And so what will happen is when you log in with a login name and password, it takes that password that you've provided and it hashes it. And then it will compare that to this hash. And if those two match, then it will say, okay, you're allowed in. It's never decrypting this password. This password is not, it's a one-way encryption. Now I'm really simplifying this. I'm skipping some steps. This is not a primer on how the authentication system works. It's just a kind of a brief overview to kind of show you that, yes, this is a much more secure system than what you'd roll on your own. So there's a password hash. There's also the security stamp, which is used with the password hash, and that's all we need to say about that. Now there are other fields here: phone number, two-factor authentication, is it locked out, and the username, which is my email address. So that is the user. That's all we have going right now. That's kind of cool though. We have a system in place that's already built a database for us with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tables. This one is a migration table, which tells us if we need to change any of these table structures. That's an entity framework thing. And for those of you who've been watching my videos for a while, you know I'm not a big fan of entity framework, but in this case, we kind of have to use it. So we're using entity framework. Just a little piece of it though, not a huge part of it. So these are created for us. The data is going in just fine. We've got even the forms, they're pretty basic and pretty plain, but they work. And there's pretty much all the structure we need, even a forgot password structure in place for us. So we can stop right there, and we already have a really big step up for our system in that we now have the ability to log into our application. Now we haven't used that login or restricted access yet, and we'll get to that. But first, I want to get the next step further and actually enable that Twitter authentication, just to kind of show you how easy it is and also how you would go about setting it up and what the difference is in the data that comes through here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to close this down. I'll unpin my SQL Server, and I'm going to repin my Solution Explorer. And come down here to this startup.auth.cs. Remember, there's a commented out section down here for my Twitter authentication. Now, the first thing we need to do is get our consumer key and consumer secret. That comes from Twitter itself. And the way I do that is to go to apps.twitter.com. I'm going to bring that over here on this screen. So here I've logged into apps.twitter.com as my login. And I actually already have one app created, and that's a little application I created for myself. But let's create a new application for this demo project. So create new app. And the name has to be unique. And so let's call this Tim's MVC Demo. Or Demo. Let's make it plural. Tim's MVC Demo. And the description, this will be shown to the user. This is the MVC Authentication Demo app for YouTube. The website, we don't have one yet. So what we'll do is we're going to do http://localhost. And we'll leave that just as is. And we'll do the same thing for our callback URL. Now, when you actually deploy this into a production site, what you do is come back here and change this to your actual URL. So for now, these four are set, and we'll check the box that says, yes, I have read and agreed to the terms. So we'll create our application, and it says not a valid URL format. No problem. So what we can do is change it to a, if I can type it out, I'll change it to my 127.0.0.1 is actually just essentially localhost. So let's go ahead and create our application again. It's been created. So we had to change that website to the IP address, not the actual URL, because it didn't like just localhost. It wants to have like a www dot something. I could have changed it to my my personal domain, but this is only for demonstration purposes. All right, so there's some data here we can set up. If we go to settings, we can look through the settings here. One thing to be careful of, make sure you have a callback URL of something, and make sure this enable callback locking is unchecked for demonstration purposes, but in production you want to check this once you have the right callback URL in place. You can change your icon if you want, which is kind of nice. It shows off that yes, you are who you say you are. Instead of just doing a default Twitter icon, you could have your company logo or the application logo or site logo or something like that. And then here we have our keys and access tokens. Now, this should be private, and I'll actually blur out the actual key and secret because that's not really something you should be seeing because you could use that for nefarious purposes. But down here, if you say, oop, we had a problem, you can go ahead and regenerate the key, or you can change the app permissions. We're going to go ahead and change this app permissions because right now it has read and write permissions. So I'm going to modify that. I'm going to say, you know what? I only need read only. And I'm going to leave this unchecked for request email address from users. But you know what? We could check it. Let's go ahead and check it and request that just so we get that. And we should bypass need to ask for it. But we'll see. So read only, and I will check the request email address. So we don't need to actually, we must provide a URL for both application. So let's just go ahead and say read only, but not check this request email address. And that should do it. All right. So it should take a moment for the changes to be reflected. Let's go back and get that key. So I'll go ahead and copy that. And then I'm going to, for right now, I'm not going to paste it into here because there's one more tweak or problem we have to deal with when it comes to Twitter authentication specifically. And that is right now, as of this video, there's a bug with HTTPS, which is what you're supposed to use for this, obviously, for talking about authentication. But there's a bug where it doesn't accept the client certificate, and it says it gives a 401 error, and says even though you have the right consumer, the API key and secret, we've got a problem. And so I will link to this in the description. There is this Stack Overflow post about it. If you don't know about Stack Overflow, you get to know it. StackOverflow.com. It's the place to get information about programming. Now, if you have a question, instead of posting a question, search for it. Most likely it's been answered about 5 times. So if you do decide, hey, I can't find any, I've looked and I've looked and I've looked and I can't find my specific problem, when you post the question, make sure that you give a lot of information. Don't just say, I'm having a problem with this, period. Because what will happen is your question will get downvoted and removed from the site, and you'll feel like an idiot. You'll feel like people hate me. You know, people don't like the questions I ask. They talk down about me. They tell me all these bad things, which unfortunately is true sometimes. People are a little harsh. But the reality is, if you ask a good question, you'll get a good answer. So, and don't take it personally. They're just trying to protect the site. There's a lot of people on here that really work hard to make sure this is not a junky site. And so you need to honor that by also not providing poor questions. Make sure you provide enough detail and any code snippets that are important and any error messages you've tried and what steps you've tried to reproduce the issue or to get it to go away. So that's just a little side note. I'll actually have a video in one of my courses coming up that covers how to ask a great question on Stack Overflow. So, but this is a good question. It's saying, hey, I'm getting this problem where it says the remote certificate is invalid according to the validation procedure, which is what we would get if we made this call. I know we have tested it. So, come down here to the answer, and the one that has a green check mark is the one that the person who requested the help said was the right answer. It's not always the best answer, especially over time, because this was answered back in 2014. And there is a later answer. But this person says, okay, here's the solution. Instead of doing this, which looks familiar, do this instead, which notice there's a whole bunch of stuff here for back channel certificate validator. We're going to use this. In fact, we're going to copy this directly into our code. These right here will allow us to validate the certificates that are coming from Twitter correctly. So let's copy this. We're going to paste this whole thing into our code. We'll go ahead and fix the formatting here. And we have to do a control dot here on the new Twitter authentication options and make sure we say using Microsoft.owen.security.twitter. And then down here for our certificate, again, control dot and add the using statement for Microsoft.owen.security. Those two things being done, we have now updated our call. It's a little bit different. Notice instead of use Twitter authentication and then it's passing in 2 values, we still use Twitter authentication, but we're passing in a new Twitter authentication options class instance. And so that takes in our consumer key and our secret, but also the back channel certificate validator with a number of certificates. We don't need all these certificates as of this video. We only need these bottom 2 right here for DigiCert, but leaving them in is not a problem. it will still allow us to validate against these older certificates. So it's up to you if you want to keep them in or not. I personally, since it doesn't hurt anything, feel like just leave them in. All right. With that being said, I'm going to come back over. I'm going to grab my consumer key and my consumer secret. Both of these are from Twitter, and I'm just going to gray these out. But these are this is my key and certificate or secret from that app on Twitter. I'm going to close this out and just hit run. So that's all I've done is I've added that one section for Twitter with the 2 pieces of information that Twitter gave me. That's going to build. We're going to go here to log in. And notice, in addition to my login over here, I now have use another service to log in, and Twitter is listed. Since we've added Twitter, it's intelligent enough to say, okay, then we'll go ahead and put Twitter over here as an option. We click this button. We're going to get this page right here where it says, do you want to authorize this for your account? Notice it says Tim's MVC demo. This is the MVC Authentication demo app for YouTube. And there's that icon. So that's all the stuff that we set up so that the user can identify that, yes, you are who you say you are. And then down here, it says this application will be able to read tweets in your timeline and see who you follow. That's it. It will not be able to follow people or update your profile or post tweets or access your direct messages or see your email address or see your password. There's a lot of things you will not be able to do. The only things we will be able to do are see your tweets and see who you follow, which is pretty much just if you have any login to Twitter, you can see anybody's tweet history and who they follow, pretty much. But we're not even going that far. We're just going as far as saying you are somebody. So in this case, I'm going to log in. And if I remember my password correctly, I will sign in. And nope, I don't remember my password. Let me go ahead and check that. All right, so I just went ahead and copied it from somewhere else and pasted it in. And so now it says, okay, you've logged in, and I am who I say I am. I'm Tim Corey. Do you want to authorize Tim's MVC demo to use your account? Again, just for these permissions. In our case, we aren't going to use those permissions, but we have access to them if we really wanted to. So in this case, we're just going to say, yep, I'm going to authorize this app. And we'll go back to our original our application. And we do, it says, hey, you've successfully authenticated with Twitter. Please enter a username for the site below and click register to finish logging in. It's an email address. So tim@IamTimCorey.com. Register. Done. Hello, Tim@IamTimCorey.com. So I have the same setup as my me@timothycorey.com, except the difference is I don't have a password, so it says create, but I do have one external login, which is Twitter. All right. And again, no two-factor authentication, which I'm not doing today. So that's it. So now I have successfully logged in with Twitter as well as just directly onto the site. So let's close out of this and let's look at our SQL database. So go back over here to the SQL Server Object Explorer. We're going to right-click on ASP NET Users and say View Data. And now we have 2 email addresses. The first one is my me@timothycorey.com. The second one is tim@IamTimCorey.com. Notice the password hash for the first one, I actually have a password hash. The second one's null. Remember it said create a password. I don't have a password on this site. I just log in using Twitter. So it handles the idea of, yeah, we don't know who you are as far as your password goes, but we do know who you are because Twitter says that's who you are. So we've used Twitter to store the password and deal with all those hassles instead of us dealing with all the hassles of storing that password locally. So it's really up to you. You can actually blend the two. Like I said, you can create a password for this person, and then they wouldn't have to log in using Twitter. They could log in with just a username and password, or they could log in with Twitter. Either way it'd work. It's the same account. So that's kind of nice. But that's the difference between the Twitter login and the just regular user login. It's whether or not we store and handle the password ourselves. All right, so far we have logged in with our regular login and password and also Twitter, but that really hasn't affected anything about the site. So let's go ahead and change that now. So let's go to our controllers folder. And inside the home controller, I'm going to show off how you lock this down based upon who a person is or whether or not they're logged in. So let's start with just the really simple authorize. If you spell it right. I'm going to put this attribute right above the about method. Now remember with MVC, this about method in the home controller will have a path of /home/about. And the views, we have a home folder. Inside there, we have an about page. So when they call the about page, it's going to call this controller, which is going to launch the view, which is this right here, this about.cs HTML. So it's just an about page, no big deal, but let's pretend like this is a page I didn't want a non-logged in person to see. In that case, I just put authorize over that about page and say, you can't get there unless you're authorized, meaning you've just logged in. That's the very foundation basic. It doesn't matter who you are. You could register right now and then see that page. It's just you have to be logged in. You can't be an anonymous user. So let's run this. And once it launches, we're going to try and go to that about page before we're logged in. So make sure we're logged out. So we're not logged in because it says register or log in. Let's go to the contact page, which the contact page is fine. Let's go to the about page. Doesn't go there. Instead, notice the URL. It says /account/login. And then it says question mark, which question mark on a URL means, okay, here's some parameters afterwards, which is a key value pair. So in this case, the key is return URL. And the value, which is equals, the %2f means /home/about. So that's the page we're trying to get to. And it says, okay, nope, we're going to send you to the login page, but the return URL is home about. So let's use our Twitter login. Since it's easy, it's going to go, okay, no problem. I'm already logged in. It's got that cookie on my site, so we don't have to actually say yes, authorize again. So I'm logged in now as hello, Tim at IamTimCorey.com. And it took me back to the home about page. So since I couldn't go there initially without being logged in, it took me to the login page, but then remembered where I wanted to go so that once I did log in, it would send me to where I wanted to go, which is kind of a nice little feature. All right, so that's the about page, which I'm so glad we secured that. If we log off now, notice if I go back to the about, it won't go there anymore. All right, so that's pretty simple. But now let's go ahead and take it up a notch. Let's actually cut this out from here and instead put it over our controller. So it's over our home controller. What this means is that now everything in the home controller has to be authorized, meaning you have to be logged in order to have access to any of these things. Which, very important note here, we're not authorizing the account controller. okay? Because the account controller, notice it says authorize above it, but then down here where we have the login, we have allow anonymous. So you couldn't have the authorize at the very top and not have allow anonymous on the login page, because you can't get to the login page until you log in, because how do you log in without getting the login page? It's kind of a circular problem there. So make sure that you don't try to lock down the login page. That's an important page to keep open. But in our case, it's the home controller. The home controller doesn't have anything like that. There's no login in this page. That's, again, the account controller. So we can just say authorize everything, which means that index, about, and contact all need to be accessed only by a logged in person. Let's run this again and see how that affects our site. So once we log in here, instead of going to our home page, which it actually does, but notice the return URL now is just a slash, which means home, we can't go anywhere until we log in. So if I try about, nope. Contact, nope. Home, nope. We have to log in first. I log in. Once I come back, now I can get everywhere. Home, about, contact. So that's how we use, very simply, the authorize. It's just a decorator that says either this controller, which means everything in here, or one particular action in the controller needs to be accessed only by a person who has authenticated. The reason you would do this is because you say, you know what, I don't want to allow anonymous access to this particular thing. It could be as simple as, we have an internal schedule for a company of when things will be done, but we don't want our web users to see that schedule. Well, you put authorize on that particular action, but everything else is publicly accessible. Our sales page and about us and all that good stuff, anyone can get to, but you have to log in in order to see our internal production schedule. But we don't care who you are, just you have to be a company employee, which only company employees then would get login names. Right now, we allow anyone to register. We'd probably turn that off and say you have to be registered by somebody else, and then you can have access. But that's another story for another day. So that's the authorize. But now let's add the next step, which is to say, you know what? I want to say that anyone in a particular role can have access to a page, but not somebody in a different role. And we'll make it really simple. We'll keep it to an admin role, which admins have access to everything. And then there's the standard user role, which they have access to only a smaller percentage of things. So to do that, the first thing you need to do is set up roles. So let's go back to our SQL Server Object Explorer. And we're going to go to the ASP NET roles table. We'll right click and say View Data. We have an ID field and a name field. Now this is actually a pretty simple table to use, especially since it has just two fields. We have to give it both an ID and a name. So I'll give it an ID of 1 and a name of user. And I'll tab down and say ID of 2 and a name of admin. That's it. So now I have two roles. User is 1 and admin is 2. Next, let's look at the ASP NET user roles table. View data, and it has user ID and role ID. So what this does is it ties this users table to the roles table. It says, okay, what's your user and what role do they have? So let's open up our users table. And again, that's user ID is what we're going to grab. So let's grab my first one, my me@timothycorey.com. I'm going to grab the ID. I copy that and go back over to my roles table and say that user ID, I'll paste it in, has the role of 1, which is user. That's it. I'll come back over here and grab the other user ID, which is my Twitter login. And I'll say that user ID has a role of 2, which is admin. All right, I'm done. Now that's all I have to do. And now my Twitter user is an admin, and my normal login, my me@timothycorey.com, is a user role. Which right now we're not doing anything with those. So let's change that. So instead of saying just authorize, well, you know what? Let's leave authorize on the whole controller. But let's actually filter down even more and say authorize roles equals, and let's say admin. So it's about, we're going to say you actually have to be an admin in order to see the about page. So it's not just authorized, it's authorized with a particular role. And we'll do the same thing down here for contact, but instead of admin, we're going to say you have to be a user in order to see the contact page. Let's run this. Okay, so the first thing we see is no matter who we are, we can't go to the home, the about, or the contact. So let's go to Twitter and log in. It's going to redirect us back. And notice I was trying to go to contact. Well, contact is a user only. Let's go to about. I can go to about. I can go to home. Home has no specificity, so I just have to be logged in as someone. For contact, I have to be a user. Well, I'm not a user, I'm an admin. But for about, I have to be an admin. And I can go to the about page. So now let's log off, which again draws me back to the login page because I can't go anywhere if I'm not logged in. And let's log in as my other account. Testing 1. I can go to the admin or the home page. I can go to the contact page, but I can't go to the about page. So now I have limited my access based upon who I am. Now, what we'd normally do, and this is obviously a demo, but normally an admin would also be a user. But maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we don't want to mix those two and say that they are totally separate. You know, there's the sales team and there's the marketing team. And, you know, sales has access to certain things and marketing has access to different things. They don't really, they're not a superset of one another like an admin and a user is. But maybe there's some things where you say, you know what, everyone should have access to contact. So, or at least these two teams should. So we're going to say, comma admin. So now roles is user or admin. So as long as you're in one of those two groups, you'll have access, but not if you're just logged in. And I'll demonstrate that as well. So let's log in. I'll log in with Twitter. Remember, Twitter didn't work with the contact page. Let's go to the contact page. Now I can get there. I can also go to the about page, whereas if I log out and log in with my other account, I can get to the contact page, but not the about page still because the about page is just admin. Now let's log off again, and we're going to register instead. And let's just do test at test.com and a password. So now I'm logged in as somebody. But remember, I had to add my users to a group. I haven't added test at test.com to any groups. So I go to the about page, nope. I go to the contact page, nope. Because both of those require me to be in a specific group. Either the admin group for the about page or either user or admin group for the contact page. So because I've just registered, I don't have any of those groups. That's how you get around or allow anyone to register and yet limit certain things. You could say that you have an employee group and every employee gets added to that group. So you could allow users to register and they could maybe have more insider access to your site, but they wouldn't have the employee access necessary to see that production schedule, or whatever it is. But those access levels then allow you to kind of dial in what you can see or not. You can even add the roles up here. So you could say this whole controller, you have to be, say, an employee or a user or an admin or whatever role you created. And those roles are pretty endless. So you can create whatever roles you want. I would suggest to try and keep it as limited as possible. Don't go crazy. Otherwise, you have a bajillion different roles and you have to, keep listing them out here, and that's just silly. But that does allow you to kind of make it a little more granular who has access to what without really doing much touching. You just put a string here and you're done. Now, one of the questions you may ask is, how do I find out who it is that's actually logged in? Now, remember when we run this, it says, hi, Tim at IamTimCorey.com or hi, me at TimothyCorey.com. That's the username. We can get that fairly simply by actually using Microsoft's code. If we go to the Manage controller, this is where you manage a lot of different things for our user account. If we scroll down here, you're going to see user ID is captured by saying user.identity.getUserID. So you can use that to grab the user ID who is currently logged in, if there is a person logged in. So as long as you have that authorized on a controller or action, you could then in that action ask for the user ID. And from that, you could then get more information about the user and or say, this is who did this action. So you could log, Tim was logged in when he deleted 5 users. And they could go ahead and blame me because who was logged in at the time when action was taken. So that's just, again, this is tip of the iceberg stuff. There is so much more we could get into with authorization, but I don't want to overload you, especially since this video is already around an hour, and I don't want to get into 2 and 3 and 4 hours for one simple video. But I just wanted to introduce you to the idea that it's not really that hard to set up an authentication system in ASP.NET MVC. It really is a matter of just changing that option at the very beginning of the template to say, set up the identity for an individual. And then it adds that little local SQL database, and it sets everything up so that you have a login button, you have a register button, you have a forgot password button, you have a, all that change password button, all that good stuff is already done for you. You can then just go ahead and say, well, I don't like the forgot password page. Go ahead and tweak it right there, because that's all under the views account, and there's all those different pages based upon what options you enable or disable. So that's all right there. You can make any modifications you want. You can style it differently. You can change, make it look a little more pretty or whatever. But it's all done for you. And then adding Twitter is just a matter of adding those couple lines. And don't forget that link down below that's going to allow you to add the information about the SSL. So, but even that, it wasn't that hard. I went to Stack Overflow, copied and pasted, and we're kind of done. Facebook is even easier. So is the Google authentication, Microsoft authentication, of course. So you could allow your users to log in with, 4 different authentication systems pretty simply. So it's up to you how you use this, but I just wanted to kind of get in your hands, get your feet wet in the idea that it's okay to add authentication to my system that's built by Microsoft and not by me. Because it does really significantly raise the bar of security. This passes a lot of security tests when it comes to privacy and protection of your site. So it's okay to add all that in just a few steps. It's not a really difficult, complex system, even if you want to use those OAuth providers like Twitter or Facebook. So with that being said, I'm going to wrap this video up here. But if you have any questions, or if you want to see any other areas of this, you want to see a little more in depth in a certain area, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll compile those, and maybe the next video or two where I touch on this, I will throw those in as well to make sure that those are covered. All right. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.